Hey, everybody out in Manchester, Hooks at Auburn. It's the Progress Report. Believe it or not, this is going to be the last show for July in the summer of 2018. Believe that or not, this is time is really moving on. Say you're going to get older. It's time for breakfast every 15 minutes.
I'm still trying to get over Y2K. I'm trying to figure that out. I'm a little behind the curve.
Y2K. I completely forgot about that.
In any event, folks, we're going to have a good time tonight, I think, and we hope some of you will choose to join in with the conversation. As always, 640-3091. We have the irrepressible, feisty, and always passionate Arnie Arnesen with us.
I'll be calm.
And she'll be calm,
but
only for the opening. And then we're going to go on. And we got some interesting things, I think, to discuss today. Today, I'm completing my third term as a member of the New Hampshire House, hoping to get a fourth. Today was the most amazing and unexpected result I've ever seen in the New Hampshire House. And we're going to talk about that. It has to do with this whole issue of whether New Hampshire businesses might be adversely affected by a Supreme Court decision that says even if you don't have a physical presence in the state, your people that are selling online to people out of state where there's a sales tax may have to remit that sales tax. And it was a very interesting and very unexpected thing, and we'll be talking about that. But I believe my good friend Mike Farley may have a briefer than sometimes.
I'm going to hit three topics in
POTUS report on the progress report.
Okay. So for this week's POTUS report on the progress report, I have just three things to report. I just want to let folks know, remind folks, tomorrow's the deadline for all those kids that were taken away from their families to be reunited with their parents. They're not going to hit those numbers. They're not going to come close. But something very interesting has happened. Right now they have reclassified. I didn't know there was classifications, but they've reclassified over 900. I think the number's like 936 of the approximately 3,000 children as what was the phrase they use? Ineligible. That's the term. Ineligible to be reunited with their parents. And these are to pick up all the cases where the parents are no longer in the country or where they have kind of been lost to the system if they are still in the country. So they've created this new category called ineligible for reunification. These poor kids, what did they do to deserve that? And we'll see if the court, what they have to say about that tomorrow. Second thing I wanted to talk about, this great tariff plan that we've got going on has clobbered Midwestern farmers, especially the soybean farmers, who were selling a lot to China, and they've been hit with reciprocal tariffs. So, of course, because this economic plan works so great, we're going to come up with a $12 billion bailout for the farmers. So, yes, folks, you and I are going to be writing a check to a farmer in Iowa or somewhere so that President Trump's brilliant plan will work. New Hampshire already is a donor state to the rest of the country. We already get back less than $1 for every dollar we send to the federal government, and now we'll at least know where we'll be contributing to that $12 billion bailout to the farmers who wouldn't have needed it but for this change of policy and this trade war with China, their biggest market for soybeans.
That it's not working.
It's working fine.
Yeah,
it's working fine.
Proof.
This was part of the plan. We're going to put 12 billion. We'll funnel it back. And then finally, very quickly, this is just my snarky comment. Apparently, President Trump went ballistic upon finding that his wife Melania was watching CNN on Air Force One, and he has issued an edict. I don't know if he signed a full executive order with that giant signature, but all televisions in Air Force One are now to be tuned to Fox News exclusively.
That's
what a petty little man he is.
I had not heard that one.
Oh my God.
And that's the POTUS report on the progress report. I hope it was quick enough, Bob.
So Melania is chattel. Melania is a slave. She has no right to her own opinions and to her own TV because he's going to dictate to her.
You could read that into that, couldn't you? You could read that into that.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
And this kind of dovetails. This wasn't part of the POTUS report, but we are reminded that the president said only yesterday, do not believe your lying eyes, believe Fox News. Not in so many words. Don't believe what you're reading. Don't believe what you're seeing. Very Orwellian. Haven't heard any of my fine Republican friends stand up to challenge them yet.
Wow.
what's going on? Actually, polls just came out. He is at the highest approval rate among Republicans, and higher than George Bush after 9/11. He is the most popular Republican president among Republicans right now.
But let's also remember that the percentage of Americans that claim to be Republicans has shrunk.
Well, I hope it keeps shrinking.
So here's the thing, if you've got 50 people and you're at a 95% approval rating, that's fantastic. But if last year you had 150 people, that's part of the story. The story is people are abandoning the Republican Party.
Yes.
People are becoming undeclareds. Look at New Hampshire.
And pollsters are wondering if people are declining to self-identify as Republicans as they begin the polls.
Exactly. And if you look at New Hampshire, the largest party are the undeclareds. They exceed Democrats and Republicans, and that's part of this story, and that's what's happening with a lot of the Republican base.
Yeah, well, that's amazing. It's just amazing, but that's a very good point. Now, I want to go on to what happened today a little bit.
Yeah, breaking news, Bob. This
is
crazy.
Breaking news. The governor of New Hampshire, Chris Sununu, when the Supreme Court ruled at the end of June that you could ask states to remit sales taxes consistent with other states and taxing entities' laws back to them, even if they did not have a physical presence in your state, a warehouse or store or something like that. And the governor went, I think, a little bit crazy. He said this is a horrible thing for New Hampshire. We'll have all our little businesses having to fill out tax forms for, South Dakota.
Well, this is a special problem for non-sales tax states like New Hampshire. There's not a lot of them, but there are several.
It's a handful.
It's a handful.
We don't collect sales tax on our own stuff when we do have brick and mortar here in the state.
Except for rooms and meals.
Well, rooms and
sales
meals,
tax.
So
sure.
I guess
and
we do know how to do it.
We actually do collect taxes.
We do collect taxes on sales.
You're going down a different road than where I wanted to go with this. The point I'm trying to make is that New Hampshire's unique. This isn't just some sort of a out of the blue political decision by the governor. There's a reason behind this. New Hampshire businesses don't remit sales tax typically on non-food beverage tobacco items, and what this would do is it would impose a real heavy burden on smaller businesses. Now, the Supreme Court case, Bob, was Wayfair. This is a gigantic company. They ship all over the United States. They ship high volume, and I have to imagine that the states that were suing them, there was a lot of money at stake. There was a lot of uncollected sales tax. So I can understand the argument, but I wonder why they imposed it all the way down to mom and pop selling, maple caramels or something.
Probably that won't happen, and that's why what you're saying is inaccurate. So, Bob, why don't you complete what happened at the House today, so you can hear that what you're suggesting that the caramel
what happened at the
are
House
going to be a
today
problem.
was, to me, absolutely astounding. We have the governor saying we got to have a special session. That costs a little money, but we got to have a special session in the middle of summer to come up with a New Hampshire response to this, so that our poor small businesses don't get tasked with collecting and remitting sales taxes to places like South Dakota or Seattle or wherever they may have a sales tax. New York City, all these other places, and it looked like a slam dunk. He had a task force to work on this. They unanimously recommended some legislation, bipartisan task force, and it just looked like this was going to be a slam dunk and a great win for Governor Sununu. Well, the bill had to originate in the Senate. Under our system, the bill had to originate in the Senate. We had to sit there, and we had a short delay while we waited for the Senate to act. The Senate acted unanimously in favor of the governor's position on this, 24-zip. And then it came over to the House. And by gosh, in the House, against all expectations, since the leadership of both parties, for different reasons, I believe, but both parties were supporting this response. I think the Republicans wanted to do it to help Governor Sununu. Some of the Democrats wanted to do it so not to be blamed if we didn't do anything.
Yeah, their fear of being associated with anything with the word tax.
That's exactly right. And it came to the House.
About fear.
And I have a dear friend that sits next to me, a Republican from Hampton named Phil Bean. And he and I vote together on an amazing number of things. And he said, well, I wonder if we'll get 75 votes. I said, I think we'll do better than that. This thing went down by a 15-vote margin after unanimous recommendation from the task force for a unanimous vote in the Senate, with the entire the executive branch entirely in favor of it, the leadership in favor of it, it went down. It was astounding. It was amazing. I've never
And
seen
tell them
anything like that.
how many Republicans voted against the Sununu bill, how many Democrats voted against it, because there was a huge number of Republicans. This wasn't carried down by Democrats. It was almost
Right.
identical number on both sides.
Now, right after
This
this,
is incredible.
one of my colleagues overheard Majority Leader Hinch giving a radio interview. He says the Democrats sold us out. The Democrats said they could deliver the votes. Well, here's the fact. 85 Democrats voted for an amendment which stripped out everything except making a study commission to look at this problem.
Neutered the bill.
Neutered the bill.
Right.
Okay. The operational parts of the bill were gone. 79 Republicans.
It's the same number. It's the same
It's
number.
the same number. So the attempt to say this was a Democratic sabotage of Governor Sununu's efforts to protect New Hampshire businesses, that's a crock. It's not true. They could not get their own caucus to
Right.
support this sufficiently. They've got the numbers.
That's
I hope this
right.
November those numbers change. But this time in this legislature,
They have the
they've got the
numbers.
numbers. All they had to do was get their own folks in line and line this up. They could not do it. This was, just an absolutely amazing result.
Bob, I got a couple questions. Could I ask one? Why did it have to originate in the Senate? Do you know? Or
I
is
don't
it
know
just
the
some
answer to that.
arcane
I don't know
New
that.
Hampshire
It was
rule
some
or procedure?
That's a very interesting question.
I don't know why, but that
And
was
can
the
you
way
tell
it's
us
set
a
up.
little bit about what the bill would have done? What
What the bill would have
briefly.
done? Yeah, that's a good thing. What the bill would have done, and by the way, the authors of this bill, which included, of course, the Attorney General and his staff, they wanted to be very careful because there's a real problem doing something about this because the Supreme Court decision, it was the United States Supreme Court,
Right.
and their holdings are binding
Right.
throughout the country. That is federal law at the highest level.
We would be preempt.
It would be preempt. So they had to go very carefully. So what they decided to do was say, well, before anybody can come here and try and make our businesses be tax collectors for South Dakota or wherever, we have to have somebody send us a registration form. The Attorney General has to look at it and make sure it's not a scam thing. And they, after a certain period of time, they have to send in their rules about it. It was all that sort of thing. And
So in other words, to provide the information that a local business might need in order to comply
yeah,
with
and
this new rule.
all of that. Now here's the problem. The more they made this an effective attempt to protect us from having to collect taxes for South Dakota or wherever, the more it became constitutionally invalid. Because there is a Commerce Clause, and the Congress has to regulate interstate commerce. The states can't. And so that's the problem. So the more they went toward making it an effective thing, the more likely it was, and I think it was very likely to be held unconstitutional. On the other hand, the more they went toward just sort of, pretending to do something, the more it looked like a joke.
Right. It was it was pretending. It was so that he would look like he put his fist down when ultimately, basically, everybody would still have to write the check
Ineffective
anyway.
legislation
Ineffective,
wouldn't have helped
completely.
anybody, but we would have passed a
Right,
bill.
but it's a headline. It's
Yeah.
a headline for politics. It's just not content.
This
Now,
strikes
this-
me very interesting, Bob. I don't mean to interrupt, but this is very similar to what we see on the national level, where you have a lot of bills that don't even make it to the floor. Our rules require that they do because the Republicans can't get their own act together, and they have that Hastert rule that
Yeah.
they have.
But this
they
was
have
a
to pass
special
it.
session called. This was not about not getting. This was designed by the Republicans, created by the Republicans.
Yeah, they didn't have to
drafted
do
by the-
this.
They didn't have to do this.
This
and
should
they
have been in
couldn't-
their pocket before they
They
started.
could not even deliver their own party.
They
on
could not
something that
deliver
they
their
could.
own party. So when they attempt to say this is the Democrats not supporting New Hampshire small business, don't believe it. This was a bipartisan effort that sent this thing down. Now here's a very salient fact. South Dakota's law, and they were the people
This
that
is really
litigated
important, very
in
much so.
the United States Supreme Court. South Dakota has a safe harbor provision that they're not going to ask anybody to remit taxes from any state, whether they got a sales tax or not, if there's less than $100,000 of business being done in that state to South Dakota people, or 200 transactions.
Oh, to South Dakota, because my initial thought was something like that kind of throttles business. You get a cap at what you can do, but the New Hampshire business could have more than $100,000 in revenues, provided that 100,000 or less than 100,000 went to South
Yeah.
Dakota. I see.
No.
No, less than no. The sales activity. Once the sales activity on, let's say you're selling widgets for $10. Once you've sold so many $10 items that you're up to $100,000, at that point, then you have to start remitting sales taxes. But if you only sell 90, no tax. If you have 200 transactions, but you only had 150, no tax.
But here's my
It's
question, if
just
there's
as that
50
way.
states, if there's 100,000 exemption, does that apply to all 50 states? So I really
each
get.
state has their own threshold.
Okay.
Each state has their own threshold. And here's the thing. I have asked, starting with the information session, they asked us to go up to on July 12th. Before we got to this, well, I guess it was last Monday, and whatever that was. And I have asked the commissioner of the Department of Business and Economic Affairs, which used to be part of DRED, Taylor Caswell, I said, how many businesses, if South Dakota's law is the template, if this is the example we're going to deal with, how many New Hampshire businesses are going to be affected by this? Zip.
Zero.
Zero.
Oh.
Zero.
Nada. None.
So it's a solution looking for a real problem.
And not only that, but there is software available right now that would cost you like $25 or $50 a month, whatever it is, so that you wouldn't have to worry about, well, what's the safe harbor in North Dakota? What's the safe harbor in Tennessee? You just plug in the numbers, and the numbers would come out.
There's an app for that.
There's
You
an
can do it
app,
on your phone.
exactly. But here's something that a lot of people don't know. New Hampshire does not have an income tax, as well as not having a sales tax. But a lot of people, maybe 100,000 people, come from Massachusetts to work in New Hampshire, come from Maine to work in New Hampshire, and come from Vermont to work in New Hampshire. Guess what, boys and girls? We have to collect the income tax that they would have paid if they were working in Massachusetts, but instead they're working in New Hampshire, and we have to remit it back to the state of Massachusetts, back to the state of Maine, back. We've been doing it forever. That was the law. Now, have you heard people bitching and moaning, well, wait a minute, they're working here. They're not working there. Why do we have to collect taxes and send it to Boston? Well, I would love to have an income tax here so we could keep that money, but that's another story. But we have been doing this forever, everyone. Please understand that. So this is not about a heavy lift. This is not unique. And frankly, we were talking about the fact that this is about 41 states have sales taxes, 41. In fact, when South Dakota sued Wayfair and went to the Supreme Court, there were 41 states that filed amicus briefs, 2 territories filed amicus briefs, and the District of Columbia filed amicus briefs. So let's say we pass something to do an end run around the Supreme Court. We would have 41 states sue us, 2 territories sue us, and the District of Columbia sue us. We would lose, and what's worse is, Mike, is that maybe there would have been a penalty. So the businesses that didn't send their taxes might suddenly be hit with a penalty, but a penalty from every single state that we didn't remit sales taxes to. So the governor might be putting businesses in a very precarious situation, as opposed to doing something that might ultimately help them. And
while we're litigating
Right.
whether this is valid or not, in business after business is going into jeopardy.
Exactly.
And not only for the taxes, but as we know,
Right.
you know,
and if you worry about this, and you can
the
help
penalties and interest often exceed the
Exactly.
tax bill.
Exactly. And
Let's talk to Tim.
if they wanted to help people, what they could have done is said, okay, we'll help you buy the software, the app for this. That's what we'll help you for.
Yeah, we'll
and then
give you
in the end,
a credit on your business profit or
and-
business
and
enterprise
because
tax
it's a
for
level
that.
playing field, there's no advantage or disadvantage.
Hey, Tim, join us, please.
Well, we got Tim on the phone. Go
Happy
ahead,
to
Tim.
welcome you. Tim?
Tim?
It's Tim Smith over in Ward 10.
Gotta love you, Tim. How you doing?
You're a hero tonight, Tim.
Hey, thanks. Hey, I wanted to throw in a nickel about the Wayfair bill today. You know, one of the things that nobody was talking about leading up to this is the constitutional angle that, you know, one of the things the bill had in it is that the state government in all these other states would have been required under this bill to register with the New Hampshire Department of Justice. But, you know, under American federalism, one state isn't empowered to tell another state what to do.
Thank you.
We can't tell Massachusetts to raise the speed limit. You know, they can't tell us that our license plates have to be purple.
Right.
You know, we're not empowered to make these other states do these registrations. And I mean, this poor committee, these people working on the committee were only given a week to write this bill. That's nowhere near enough time to come up with a solution to something that's so complicated like this and still have it be constitutional, like you were talking about a minute ago, that balance between being effective and being something that will actually pass constitutional review.
Yep.
And Tim, I don't know about you, but I'm not sure that there's anything that could pass constitutional review. given what the Supreme
Yeah,
Court did in
it's
the
a
way.
pretty sweeping
And, you know,
decision.
that's why we wanted to do that study commission.
Right.
You know, to have some experts work on it
Right.
for more than a week.
Right.
And see if there's any options, but you know the Senate didn't think that was an important priority.
So let me just say something, Tim. I was thinking about years ago. Years ago, we were in the worst economic depression since the Great Depression in the early 90s, late 80s. Actually, the early 90s. And we could not balance our books. We were going into a tailspin. So how did New Hampshire balance its books? It did something called Metascam. And it used a poor people's federal health care program to bring in revenue so we could balance our books, all right? In fact, we got more money out of Metascam, the scam on the federal government's poor people, than any state in the nation per capita. And we didn't have to repay it. It was like, I just keep thinking, we're in this pool together. We somehow want to use opportunity when it's available to us, and then when the obligation is reversed and we're supposed to sort of pay our fair share and pay the bill the way everybody else is, oh no, we can't do this. I'm sorry, that if that's what you're going to do, then repay the $1 billion you took in Metascam. All right, then just
I
send us
don't think
the
the
check.
two are tied, but you make a good point.
All right, I just want people to realize that we open the door when it's convenient and we shut the door. Sorry, it's 50 states. It's called the United States of America, not the 50 fiefdoms of America.
Right. And you know that's the real key to this whole Wayfair thing, is that this isn't just a New Hampshire problem. I mean, as Mike was saying, it's a different problem for New Hampshire than it is for a lot of other states. But you know, someone in Wyoming who's selling on the internet has to deal with this problem too. It's not just us.
Yes.
And you know, like Bob said, constitutionally, this has to be solved in D.C. As much as we might hate that, you know, we all swore an oath to the Constitution, and the votes fell how they fell today.
And let me just say one other thing, because everyone's saying, well, the internet was not supposed to be a place for sales taxes. So let me remind everyone.
Right.
Remember when there were downtown stores, and then everyone got ticked off because the shopping mall came in, and all those stores left to go to the shopping mall. Then the shopping malls got ticked because the big box stores came in, and they were really ticked off because, oh my God, they were taking away all their business. Well, now what we have is, now we have the sort of the social network, you know, virtual box store called the internet. And this is called progress. It's called change. But the operative word here is you are taxing sales. Whether it's sales in a building, whether it's sales in a box store, or whether it's sales online. The operative word is sales. And that's what you tax.
Yep. Hey, we got to take a break, folks. Tim, hang on if you want to. I'm going to just take a quick break. We'll be right back. I want to tell a little another story from our caucus today that you're involved in. So,
Okay, sounds good.
Hang on through the break there, Tim.
yeah,
We'll be right back, folks.
we'll be right back. So this is our second segment of 3. We usually have in the progress report. We're a little over on it. That's because we're really quite hopped up about
Earth-shaking
the amazing,
news.
Earth-shaking news today. A real
loss for Chris Sununu.
A real gut
loss.
punch for Chris Sununu. Let me remind
The
folks.
third of 3, Bob, you were mentioning.
The third of 3. Chris Sununu got elected governor. He's apparently got good poll ratings from his first term, and we seldom deny a first-term governor a second term. This may be that time, but who knows? And yet his big 3 items, 3 of his biggest items, have been turned down by his Republican-dominated legislature. Right-to-work legislation, couldn't get it done. The school voucher program, couldn't get it done. And then this is the third one to, show he was standing up to the United States Supreme Court's in his opinion, wrong decision.
And in a special
could not
session,
get it
too.
done. Could not get it done, even though we had at least some support from the leadership of both parties. But the story I wanted to tell, Tim, and certainly involves you, is you were getting up and you were saying that you thought this statute was unconstitutional on its face, and you had some good arguments. But then you said, "But I'm not a lawyer." And then one member of our caucus, and I won't say who it was, said, "Well, I am a lawyer, and I agree with you. It's unconstitutional, but because of the political danger I think we face, I'm going to vote for it anyhow." That took the wind out of my sails. And Tim, you had the perfect riposte to that, which is that we all took an oath to support the constitutions, both of the United States and the state of New Hampshire. How can you get up and say you're going to vote something that you, as a lawyer, have decided was going to be unconstitutional? I think that was a very turning point for our caucus. I think that really made a big difference, Tim. I can't prove it, but I believe, and I think you handled it brilliantly, I believe that a lot of people said, I'm not going to vote for this. If a lawyer in the room says, and I was sitting with two other lawyers too, and they were agreeing, if the lawyer says that in this case it was a she, thinks it's unconstitutional, how can you vote for it? That's not consistent with what we're here to do.
But Tim, what that lawyer said today is exactly what Republicans are saying about Donald Trump. We know he's wrong. We know he lies. We know this, but we're still going to stick with him.
But politically, it's expedient.
But politically, it's expedient. And at some point in time, we need to find a spine. Our country is too important.
Exactly.
Our Constitution is too important. The future is too important. And what you heard today is basically what we're screaming about, where how could the Republican Party evaporate in front of Donald Trump as every single value that we thought we had as a nation is now being challenged by him. And yet you see it in sort of a minute version of it in the New Hampshire caucus of the Democratic Party. But I just want people to remember, you are constitutional officers. You are constitutional officers.
But I want to point out that the Democratic caucus and apparently a good chunk of the Republican caucus actually did the right thing here in New Hampshire.
For very different reasons.
For very different reasons.
Right.
Concede that.
Well,
Let's bifurcate. Let's talk only.
That. I had a number of people tell me, like out in the hallway and after the vote and whatnot throughout the day, that the discussion in caucus changed their mind. And I got to tell you, after I was done speaking, I honestly can't remember the last time in caucus where people stood up and cheered. That was a really interesting moment, and it gave me a glimmer of hope that we might win the day.
Well, sometimes you troublemakers are right, Tim.
The U.S. Constitution won the day.
Yeah.
It's exactly what you said. We all took an oath to support and uphold the Constitution. And I have voted against bills at least a dozen times that I really liked because I knew that it wasn't going to pass constitutional muster.
So can I say something?
And, that has to be our first priority, like it or not.
Right.
And I guess maybe what has been missing for politicians is the idea of bravery. And I understand the politics of something versus the constitutionality. But we didn't just elect them to basically play the politics. We not only elected them to follow the Constitution, but we wanted them to be brave and to be honest and to tell us this. And I think in a lot of ways what's happening in Washington is convincing a lot of people that if this isn't the time to stick your neck out and be brave, when is it?
Right.
And that is so
Exactly,
important.
exactly.
We need to be brave.
I'm reminded of my disappointment in the Democrats during the time after 9/11 with the passage of the Patriot Act and all of this other
Homeland
really,
Security.
under the umbrella of Homeland Security, the reorganization of government, the funneling of millions of dollars into private mercenary armies and everything else, and because they were politically cowards. Even John Kerry voted in favor of doing that, of kind of altering the way we do business here and our freedoms here in New Hampshire. And I gotta really respect a guy like Tim and the folks that he persuaded and kind of rang the bell in their head. Hey, wait a minute, my first priority is to the Constitution. And I have to say, Bob, I am appalled to hear that someone could stand up and say, I know it's unconstitutional, but I'm going to vote for it anyway.
That's what happened. That's what
cannot
happened.
believe
That's
that
what
someone
happened.
would, even if they
just
thought
shocked.
it, that they
But
would
to say it publicly,
articulate that
exactly.
publicly. That's shocking to me.
You mentioned 9/11 and what we did with the creation of the Homeland Security and everything else that basically sort of trashed a lot of the
Well,
things that we
people were
value.
lining up trying to get to the front of the line. Who could be most verbally patriotic without having that effect?
I read an article because we started the show by talking about reuniting families, about what's happening with immigration. One of the real tragedies of the creation of Homeland Security was that everything dealing with immigration, whether it was in Treasury, whether it was in Justice, it all suddenly got put under the umbrella of security. Mm-hmm. And that meant that immigration was something to question. That that every kind of immigration was something that made you raise questions about whether you were safe. And that wasn't the case before. And that's another problem, is there are so many consequences because nobody stood up and raised a question, what are we doing? Because everybody was afraid of the politics of 9/11. And here's the other interesting thing, we have never audited Homeland Security. We have no idea what they spend and ultimately what they do. That's even more frightening.
It's interesting you talk about consequences. This is something that Bob brought up at the initial hearings when this bill was still in that special committee. Is that, if this had passed, the state of New Hampshire would have almost immediately found itself the target of dozens of lawsuits from all over the country. I mean, this would have cost us tens of millions of dollars in litigation had this legislation passed as it was written. And, even the people advocating for it acknowledged that it would have eventually been struck down in court. So we would have wasted millions and millions of dollars as an unintended consequence litigating this dead horse that was going nowhere. And by the way, any New Hampshire businesses that were complying with this legislation before it got struck down, when it eventually was thrown out in court, they would suddenly get hit with all these retroactive bills for back tax collection that they'd suddenly be on the hook for, or find themselves in court. The unintended consequences from this would have been astronomically absurd.
Yeah.
And, it's unfortunate that it took such a dramatic, sort of parliamentary situation with all these amendments and, trying to rile people up in the caucus. It's really unfortunate that it takes that to motivate people to sort of see the forest through the trees. And, oh, by the way, we took an oath of office.
So wait a minute. So, Tim, let me just ask a question. It was voted in unanimously in the New Hampshire Senate. So talk to me about the coffee club in the Senate where there was not one person to stand up. Now, what's the number differential between Democrats and Republicans in the Senate? How many Republicans are there? 4. There's only 4 Democrats?
No, I mean, it's 14 and 10.
14 and 10.
10 to
So,
14.
right. So not one Democrat could articulate, and there are a couple of lawyers, I believe, that are Democrats that are in the New Hampshire Senate, and they couldn't follow the constitutional arguments here? What was the kumbaya that was coming out of the Senate? They were all cowards. They were all following the politics and not the Constitution.
Can't argue with this.
So I'm sorry, honey
You
bun,
can't argue
but
with it.
I'm grateful to you. I am just appalled at the people in the Senate. I am appalled because what you are saying, they were agreeing to. It's shocking.
Obviously, none of us, talking now can speak for anyone in the Senate.
Oh,
but,
I know.
The scuttlebutt in the hallway that I was hearing is that, the senators really wanted to push for, initially at least, the Democratic senators really wanted that study committee in the bill. And, of course, we sent it back to them with only that, and then it went down in flames. So it makes me wonder, what the heck was the real story on that side?
Yeah, it does indeed, Tim. That's a good point. I was disappointed that the Senate, when they got back, they could have accepted our version of it, which was just the study commission, which we all love that idea. It's a good thing to know more about.
We should have the facts
And
on
yet,
the table.
and yet, in their peak, they just shut the whole thing down, and we got nothing, which is better than what.
That blew my mind. I honestly expected that when I got home from the State House today, I was going to see that that it passed through the Senate unanimously, because who doesn't want a panel of experts working on this problem for months and coming up with a really robust state New Hampshire response?
Let me ask a question.
Apparently the Senate doesn't want that.
So let me ask you a question. Do you think Chris Sununu basically polled the Senate, and since he had all the senators, Republicans and Democrats, in his pocket, he basically assumed that the House would follow like sheep?
I have no idea.
Yeah,
I got to tell you.
Well, let me ask you this, Tim.
The governor has been invisible throughout this process. Like,
Yeah.
as soon as the whole study commission thing started, I don't know about, like, maybe Bob has a different experience than I did, but I didn't hear or see anything from the governor. He didn't even stick his hand in and wave, during the special session today. Last time when we had the special session on Medicare expansion, Maggie Hassan was in the building all day walking around getting involved.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting.
We didn't see that leadership from Sununu today.
Interesting. When this vote came down, Senate President Morse was up in the gallery. No sign of the governor, as far as I can tell, any of his top people.
Wow.
Right.
Just very strange. Very, very strange. But Senator Morse is saying he's going to try again. They're going to try to bring back something, before we get another special session. I don't know. But, Tim...
what do they say about doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different response?
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
I think that's Einstein's
Right.
definition of insanity. Is that what you're getting at there, Tim?
It's been going around these
You
days.
said it. I couldn't possibly comment.
It's been going around these days.
Well, congratulations, Tim. A really outstanding work for you today. And I don't... Were you surprised that you had the success you did? Because I have to admit, I was totally surprised.
I wasn't expecting a win on that. My plan, initially when I was planning the opposition to this, at least my part in it, I didn't know that there was going to be the floor amendment. I was planning to use a parliamentary move called dividing the question
Right.
that would have allowed us to vote on the policy and the study committee separately.
Right.
Well, the
rather
floor
than have
amendment was a
one
great
vote on
vehicle. It
all
was a
of it.
great vehicle. I was glad that the sponsors did that, and it made it much easier, I
Now,
think.
there were no other
Right.
issues brought up today in the special session. I thought there was going to be something about Medicaid reimbursement. That was not permitted.
No, it was
just
all
limited.
ruled non-germane and not within
Okay,
the governor's
okay,
call.
okay.
So none of that happened.
Right.
Okay.
Okay.
Wow.
Tim, thanks again. Thanks for calling. Great to chat with
Have a
you.
great one, guys.
Okay.
Yeah, ciao,
Thanks, Tim.
bye-bye. I'm glad he agreed with me about all those lawsuits. Yes.
Well,
Yes,
yeah.
41 lawsuits.
Well, I think
you
it goes
darn
without
right.
saying, and they're talking about some 10,000 jurisdictions. So you got to say, well, they're all going to come after you. You
Yeah,
know what
they
I
are.
mean?
They are.
And even
Counties,
without the
the-
lawsuits, this is going to be a very costly thing for the Attorney General's office to administer. They'd have to hire people. They'd have to, deal with I mean, it was just...
What's it cost so far? What's one day special session cost the
That's a
taxpayers?
good question.
I
have
don't
no
know.
idea. I
I don't know.
You know,
But,
to
yeah.
be
But
such
they-
an abject failure.
After
you know.
originally saying they weren't going to, they decided to pay legislators mileage, so, that's a cost.
Yeah, yeah.
Because they wouldn't have had a quorum if they didn't pay the mileage, I believe, very likely.
Wow.
While we're still in the state of New Hampshire, we might as well go on to a couple of other things that are coming up. September 13th, we're going to deal with override votes on the governor's vetoes. And there's some significant ones. And a couple of them that I think are very significant that I'm very concerned about are two energy-related bills. One is Senate Bill 446, which would, among other things, increase the cap limit on renewable energy projects eligible for net metering, which is very advantageous for developers,
Bob,
from
you
1
bring
megawatt to
that
5
up
megawatts.
It seems every couple of years you bring that up. We slowly tick that net metering up. Why can't
We have-
we
we
just
have- we
go
have-
whole hog, set a high number, and go for it?
Well, we're setting a higher
I ask
number.
because I don't know.
Yeah, and we're setting a higher number. Why the number was originally set at 1 megawatt, I don't know. But we now know that Nashua has a hydro facility that they'd love to have eligible for net metering. It's above 1 megawatt. I don't know it's 5, but it's above 1. Dover has a major solar project that they want to do that will be well above 1 megawatt. And Manchester, our dear Queen City, has that big landfill over there in
Right.
Dunbarton
They've
Road.
tried twice to
That's
try
not
to
going to
put
be
together
turned
a
into
project.
gardens, folks. It's not going to be community gardens.
It's not
What's
going to be
it gonna
soccer
be?
fields.
It's not going to be
gonna
soccer
be
fields.
baseball diamonds.
But it could support a lot of good solar panels and really help Manchester meet its energy needs and make money in the process. So, and they've got way more space than the panels to generate a 1 megawatt. They could generate, 2, 3, maybe even 4, maybe even 5
Think of the
megawatts.
money savings. That
And
would
the money
happen.
savings.
It would save your property taxes.
And Governor Sununu vetoed the bill that would up that that cap from 1 to 5 megawatts.
Now,
Override's
what's
coming
his
up on
thinking
September
in
13th.
that? Is that something to support PSNH, Eversource? What's the governor's thinking there? What's the counter argument against?
The governor feels that
allowing this?
the governor feels that this will cost ratepayers money. I mean, the money will flow to Manchester to the benefit of its citizens, but there will be some additional cost on Eversource ratepayers from this. But not big, nothing that anybody's going to scream is going to put them in the poorhouse on their electric bill. But there is something there, and he produced this energy update.
I don't see it, but
This energy update, which turned out to be a complete upending of the energy strategy we adopted just 3 years ago, which was, I thought, a very fine product, to one that I think is not so fine. And this thing just suggests that subsidies are really bad. When they ignore the fact that there's no energy source that we have today, I don't
not
care whether
subsidized.
it's coal or oil,
Exactly.
and the mother of them all, nuclear, they all have subsidies.
Exactly.
And some of them are massive, dwarfing what we give to our solar developers and to our wind developers.
And the country is going in this direction. There was a wonderful article. I'm going to interview the New York Times reporter about it. The huge Hoover Dam. Mm-hmm. They're talking about turning the Hoover Dam into an enormous battery to basically absorb some of that excess energy from wind and solar. And it's a brilliant concept. They're not going to turn it into a battery, but they're going to be able to use
It's a
all
storage
this-
facility.
It's a storage facility. They're going to be able to use it. So now, not only do we know that we're producing so much in the way of wind, and we're producing so much in the way, but now we have the potential to be able to use it in off times when there is no wind and there is no sunlight. And they're looking at the Hoover Dam to do this. You're talking about an enormous amount. We are
Which they might as
galloping.
well, because the damn Lake Mead is dropping
Exactly.
drastically.
Exactly.
They don't have the power to generate.
They don't.
Yeah.
And yet this is what it will do. So we are galloping towards the future, and New Hampshire is reluctant to join. And that's just foolish, because whether we like it or not, it is going to happen. Why not be in the forefront as opposed to be so delayed that it will just cost us? And that's ultimately what's going to happen.
So I want to call on all New Hampshire reps. I don't care, Manchester reps. I don't care whether you're Republican or Democrat. Every Manchester, New Hampshire rep, like every Nashua rep of either party, Dover of either party, they should be moving to override this veto so these municipal projects can go forward to the great benefit of our taxpayers in these cities.
we'll see how many Republicans vote to override the government.
We will see that, but you know,
It's about your taxes.
after
It's
today,
about
I
your
can
taxes.
believe anything is possible in this thing.
Right.
So that will be coming up on September 13th, and that's going to be a really big thing. And I know that people in the Public Works Department in the city of Manchester, they're very anxious for this to be overridden so that they can have a properly sized project at the landfill.
But that project, this is if we make another stab at that, it's going to be the third try. It's not
it's
something that's
Third tie sometimes works.
Yep.
fourth, fifth,
You have to
sixth.
lose,
Keep trying.
lose to win. Remember that.
And then, the case is getting better and better. The costs for solar continue to drop, and solar becomes much more omnipresent everywhere.
Well, and we've talked about it. In a cold climate such as New Hampshire, solar panels are more efficient. So
They actually are.
we get just
Exactly.
as
Which is
much bang out
amazing.
of them in the
Which is
winter as we
amazing.
do in the summertime.
Yep.
And it's the wave of the future.
The
Yep.
humidity and the moisture in the south is what makes it corrosive for solar, but we actually have very good conditions.
And it's all local work. You can't put a solar panel on my house in Nebraska. You got to do it here.
Or in China.
That's right. And it's a security issue as well, everyone.
Yeah.
Because, what we're beginning to find out is that the Russians actually did perhaps hack into some of our major utilities. They didn't do anything, but they tested the weaponry, right?
Yeah.
And so when you realize that, then you really want to have the democratization of energy. You do
Yeah.
want to make sure that Manchester has solar so it doesn't have to worry about what's going on in the grid, that you have solar with battery capacity. Again, this is really also a security conversation, not just a climate change conversation, not just bringing down the cost of energy conversation.
And we in the
Well,
bigger picture, we're in a race between climate catastrophe and switching our energy systems and our transportation systems to more benign sources of power.
You know, and the big companies are way ahead of us. You know, Ford Motor Company is a transportation company now. They're not making cars anymore.
Right.
They're building city infrastructure for transportation.
Right.
They're not going to go onesies and twosies. They're going to move millions of people at a time.
Yeah.
They've got smart people thinking about this stuff. We're behind the curve. We got to get busy, Bob.
Yep, we do. We're pretty head up on this, folks, as you can see. Hey, we're told it's time for our second and final break. We'll do that right now. We'll be back with our final thoughts and some probably some more subjects when we come back for our final segment, just in a few seconds. Okay, folks, we've been having a wonderful time here, at least we think we have, discussing what happened at the State House today and what's going to be happening on September 13th. We get to address override possibilities for some of Governor Sununu's vetoes. But now we thought we might go on to discuss other things. Everybody knows, I'm sure, that this is an election year. Every member of our the House of Representatives is up for re-election. All the members of the General Court, senators and representatives are up. The Executive Council's up. The governor's up. The only thing not up in New Hampshire is our two U.S. senators, because neither one of them happens to have their 6-year term ending this year. But that's all happening. And as we go forward, there's a lot of people who think that it's of the highest national interest that the Republicans don't keep control of our national government at all levels. Obviously, they're going to have the presidency for a while, unless there's something miraculous, unbelievable happens. But things could change in the House. They could change in the Senate. And in the meantime, I'm feeling a lot of angst here as a longtime supporter of the Democrats, although not all my life, I was once a Republican. But I am feeling a lot of angst because I'm sensing a real deep divide in our own party at this time. Something I've been quite concerned about, and I kind of want to open that up to my fellow members of our panel here tonight to talk about that. It seems to me that the split that was so real and so vivid in 2016 between the Hillary people and the Bernie people has not really been healed, that there's still a feeling that there's, the establishment Democrats and the progressives, or whatever you want to call them, some people call them the Democratic Socialists. The other day there was a piece in the Times that I actually sent out on Facebook. It says, Democratic Socialism spells Democratic doom. I'm just wondering what my two colleagues here think about that. And if you want to participate by calling in at 640-3091, I want to weigh in on that. I'd like to know that too. Do you think that the results of this election are in some jeopardy because of the lack of harmony we have within the Democratic Party?
Let me say a couple of things. One, when Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez won, they asked her what kind of a lefty she was, basically. And she said, you know what? I'm neither left and I'm not right. I'm from the bottom. And you know what? That's a really powerful message.
Yeah.
Because
That's a good one.
And it's a fantastic message. Because when you look at so many unhappy people in the Midwest, in the Rust Belt, in West Virginia, it is not about right or left. they feel left out.
Yep.
They feel ignored. They've seen stagnant wages. They see their life expectancy now beginning to plummet. All those things, that isn't a right or left conversation. It's their reality. And what she answered was the most powerful answer I have heard. And also, let's go back to 2016. There were a lot of people that were torn between whether they would vote for Donald Trump or Bernie Sanders. Now, you tell me what that's about. And I will tell you.
I knew people like that. I had very long conversations with people like that. They were not loony.
No.
They were looking for something.
So let me tell you a post-mortem statistic, everyone. So they looked at voters, and they asked voters, were you supporting Donald Trump or Hillary Clinton? And it was really interesting. It was like a 40-40 split. 40% said they were with Hillary, 40% said they were with Donald Trump. But there were 20% in the middle, or this number in the middle, that they were undecided. Or it was this undecided group. They didn't like either candidate, okay? And they would ask the 20%, okay, were you still going to vote in the general election? Absolutely. Only 1 in 5 of those that neither liked Trump or Hillary, only 1 in 5 voted for Hillary, of that undecided group. Hillary had more votes, but there was 20% of the voters that were undecided. They didn't like either. Mm-hmm. What was it about what happened and the lack of connection that Hillary had with that group of people? Why couldn't she have made the appeal? And I really think that part of the problem isn't about Democrats splitting. Mm-hmm. It's that Democrats actually started to split when they really didn't even know it. It was when Bill Clinton won as a new Democrat. And the new Democratic agenda was basically a Republican light agenda. It was
the DLC, Democratic Leadership Conference. And
it was about serving corporations and showing that we were pro-business, we could work with Wall Street, we could do all those things. And as a result, we repealed Glass-Steagall. We deregulated derivatives. We did criminal justice reform just the way Republicans would have wanted. We did welfare reform. And in the end, it's not that those things aren't important. It's where he took the party. And we think somehow that what's happening now is a split. No, it's a return to really what Democrats were. They were the working people party. They cared about consumers. They cared about workers. A democratic socialist, what does that mean? I want you to have a good wage. I want you to be able to go to a doctor when you're sick. I want you to be able to afford your kids' ability to go to college. What part of that don't you like? I just want to know.
It's a label that's going to be trucked out and trotted out during this campaign, but it's a meaningless label. And I am so glad that you brought that answer, because that's exactly what I was thinking when Bob gave us the pitch here. This is the label of Democratic Socialist is irrelevant. It's the promise. It's the argument of who and what you're going to fight for.
Bob, go back to the 2008 Democratic platform and look at it. It sounds like the Democratic Socialist today. That we didn't live up to it is our problem. Mm-hmm. We actually said, these are our values. This is what we believe. Go look at the 2008, and if we could live up to that, I'm a happy camper. And that's part of the problem, because I think that really what I keep saying to people is, okay, you want the Affordable Care Act, you want public option, you want Medicare for all. Here's the good news, we're all going in the same direction. You want an increase in the minimum wage, you want a $15 wage, you want a livable wage, we're all going in the same direction. And we can sort of go down and look at the minutia, but in the end we understand why people are hurting, and we need to help.
Well, I think we should definitely get rid of the Democratic Socialist label. I do think that that's a very
Fox
big
is
negative.
going to use that whether we like it or not.
But we don't
no,
have to
do
help
not
them.
run from that. Do not run from that.
I think we should run.
I think that's
as far and as fast
baloney.
as we can for that.
That is placing
Really?
far too much
and
importance.
And look at how the Republican
on
Party
the word.
is running away from Putin. And look at how the Republican Party is running away from all this trade and tariff stuff. Remember, this was the free trade party, not anymore.
I think
this
we
was
build
the
the brand. If you think,
build a brand.
If you
was the
think that
anti-deficit party, too.
Medicare
Right, exactly.
is bad, do you want education for your kids? All of the things that you were ticking down, and there's more. You build that. That's the socialist brand. Who doesn't like it? We're all socialists. We have to be to live in a community. You can't live in a community and be antisocial.
So, no. What is socialism? Public education is a form of socialism. Medicare is a form of socialism. When you start looking,
when people
at
say
those
socialism, they think you want to take over the major means of production.
No, and that's why
That's
it's
baloney.
But that's why
That's traditional
But that's why it's
socialism.
called democratic socialism, because it understands the limits. It understands. We think we have free trade. Garbage. We think we have capitalism? Garbage. We have welfare for corporations, but they call it capitalism.
Yeah.
Come on,
We
Bob.
we just promised $12 billion
I'm
in
just
welfare
saying,
for farmers.
be careful how you label these things.
Well,
'cause
I'm just telling you what. So whenever they talk about capitalism, I want to talk about corporate welfare. All right? Because we talk about the welfare for the poor, and you know what's so sad? Look what we just did. We gave all these incredibly wealthy people an enormous tax cut. They were wealthy before the tax cut. And now, because of Donald Trump's tariff and trade policy, they have a cushion upon which to survive. But those farmers who didn't get huge tax cuts, they have no cushion.
I work in
They're on
steel.
the
Try to price a steel job today. You have no
A
idea
roof
what you're going to be
project.
paying.
Yes, exactly.
You have no idea what we're going to be paying for steel down the road. And these people are trying to lock in prices. There are companies trying to lock in projects 2 and 3 years down because they're afraid of what's going to happen.
did you-
This whole building boom could collapse.
Did you hear the story about Alcoa? Alcoa is like the largest aluminum company,
Aluminum company.
but Alcoa is losing its shirt with this trade and tariff. Why? We're putting tariffs on all the aluminum products because Alcoa brings in used aluminum to repurpose and recycle in this country.
Yeah.
It's like the bulk of their business. So now they are losing money
Yeah,
because
they don't
we are
mine
putting.
bauxite anymore.
No,
It's, you know,
exactly. They don't mind bauxite. It's unbelievable. What you realize is, again, Donald Trump is smart. There are trade problems. I agree with him. There are immigration
People
problems.
feel it in their gut.
But his solutions are wrong. It's kind of like saying, so John Nichols of The Nation magazine was on the radio with me today, and we were asking, I said to him, so how do Democrats talk about trade policy? They've been the ones that have been anti-NAFTA, anti-TPP, anti-GATT. This sounds like, they're nirvana. Look what Donald Trump is doing. And he said, Arnie, you need air to breathe, don't you? Yes. You need water to drink, don't you? Yes. Therefore, all air and all water is wonderful. No. Polluted air, you can't breathe. Polluted water, you can't drink. What's Donald Trump doing? Polluted trade policy is what he's doing. And he is destroying us with his bad policy. He is not helping. Yes, he's addressing trade, but in the worst possible way, with a blunt instrument that will bloody everyone. There you go.
Yeah.
There you go. That's how you talk about it.
And this is going to become institutional. The European Union is looking to Japan. They're moving as we speak.
China, they're so smart. They know what the long-term consequences. If they stop selling soy to China, China will find someone else because they use a lot of tofu
Yep.
in China, and they will find another market, and they will never come back.
They're going to South
They
America
won't need to.
as we're speaking.
They won't need to.
Yeah, well.
Well, another fun-filled afternoon.
Well, I'm a little overwhelmed by you two here, and I'm not sure I totally with you on this stuff. I think that Bill Clinton with his DLC had a pretty good success for a while.
That's right. That's right. He had a pretty good success, and the failure happened the day after he left.
Failure happened
because he laid
afterwards.
the foundation for failure.
I'm just not sure the country's ready to go for a party that wants to praise socialism as part
No
of
one's
their
praising
label.
socialism,
No
Bob.
one's
You got to get
praising
off that
social-
horse.
Yeah, stop it.
That's
We're
why you got to
praising
stop.
great
That's why you
things.
got to stop using that word.
You're
Well,
using it.
Well, there's-
By the way, I just want to say thank you, Arnie, for coming in. It's always a delight to have you
You're
here.
welcome.
Really
You're
appreciate it.
welcome. Thank
And I
you,
want to
Tim.
say next week I'll be here. I think with Mike, maybe with Lou, because it's the first Wednesday of the
I
month.
can be here if you want me,
Well,
Bob.
I certainly want you. But we will have Naomi Andrews here, the candidate for first
she works for Carol Shea
district.
Porter.
Yeah.
Worked for Carol Shea Porter, now running to seceder with Carol's endorsement. And so she will be our next and probably just about our last. We got maybe one or two more to go of the CD1 candidates that we're hosting here. That'll be next week.
I moderated the panel with 14 of the candidates, 3 Republicans and 11 Democrats. And let me just say something. There were some really remarkable voices on that panel.
There certainly
and
were.
Even if they don't win this time, we are creating a bench that I think is really quite remarkable, and I'm excited.
It's a great
Good
group of
point.
people.
It is.
Thanks, everybody, for joining us. Hope you enjoyed the show. See you next week.